I'm Cynthia Rowland, and this is episode 92 of EO Radio Show. This is our 14th in a series of quick tip episodes focusing on the details of state registration of nonprofit corporations. In previous episodes, we talked about filing in Delaware and California, which are the most frequently used by our clients, most of whom have a connection with California. Other episodes have focused on the state filings in Nevada, Arizona, Washington State, Oregon, Alaska, and Hawaii, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, Maine, Vermont, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire, Florida and Louisiana, North Carolina and South Carolina, and Kentucky and Tennessee, Oklahoma and Texas, and last month, New Mexico and Utah. So that's a lot of states that we've covered so far. With the help of Joe Hilliard, today we look at the basic state filing requirements for nonprofit corporations operating in Colorado and Wyoming. You can find all the prior episodes on our website or at the Farella YouTube channel, where there is a playlist just for state filing requirements. We'll work our way through the rest of the states in future episodes. Welcome to the EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource. Brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. My name is Cynthia Rowland, and I'm a partner at Farella. I'm a business and tax lawyer with more than 30 years of experience advising clients on nonprofit and charity law. Through this podcast, our lawyers and guests will discuss a range of legal and business issues impacting the nonprofit world because we understand you work hard every day to make your community a better place to live and do business. Many of our programs focus on the basics, and at times we'll do a deep dive into narrow and complicated legal issues. Again, welcome to the EO Radio Show. We're glad you're here. As we discussed in previous episodes, nonprofit corporations are one variety of fictitious business entities. Others include partnerships and limited liability companies. The laws of all the states prescribe certain formalities that organizers of these business entities must go through so that the entity can be regulated and subject to legal process as a person. Since business enterprises aren't natural persons, the laws have developed mechanisms for treating them like natural persons. This is where the state filings come into play. In order for the organizers of these fictitious entities to take advantage of the protection of the laws, they have to provide notice as to the legal name, the state whose jurisdiction they are claiming for corporate organization laws, a physical address where they can be served with legal process, and certain other information. In this episode, we aren't going to dive deep into the pros and cons for where to incorporate, but instead we are focusing on the ease of formation, standardized documents that are available, filing fees, and similar matters. As with all the states we have discussed, if you do business as a nonprofit in Colorado or Wyoming, or solicit charitable contributions there, even if just through the nonprofit corporation's website, the nonprofit may need to have a legal presence and be registered in these two states. For the details on these states, we welcome back Joe Hilliard. Joe is a senior paralegal at Farella. He specializes in formation and compliance matters for all manner of entities, and in particular, charities that are tax-exempt under Internal Revenue Code 501c3. Prior to working at Farella, he worked in-house for several real estate development and management companies in Southern California, working on real estate purchases and vendor contracting, and he now has a huge amount of experience with nonprofit organizations. So with that, welcome back to the show, Joe. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
So, as we've done in the last few episodes, now that we're well into all of the states that have these registration and reporting requirements, let's do a quick update. Anything new this week that we want to alert our regular listeners to?
No, for sure. This is a reminder, yes, to check the updated laws before you look at filing or even doing your annual reports in any state. Since we recorded last back in July, Kansas has updated their Secretary of State filings. Before we talk about this all the time, when you register as a foreign entity, you need a good standing from your home state. Like I said, usually Delaware when we talk about that. But Kansas has changed their laws, so you no longer need to provide a good standing certificate from your home state when you register in Kansas. It's unusual, as this is the first time we've discussed this and we're halfway through the states, but as we go into Colorado and Wyoming, we will see that it's no longer unique either.
Even if it may not be necessary to get your good standing certificate, it is always important to make sure you do remain in good standing in your home state, though.
That is correct. That's why we talk about annual reports when we talk about this as well, to make sure you stay in good standing with the Secretary of State. Speaking here from experience here in California, our home state, if you are not in good standing with the state of California, we've seen that it affects your registration with the Attorney General and your ability to both make grants and to accept contributions. So it's very important to keep that side of your entity in good standing.
Yep, that's absolutely true. And since so many of the national charities are looking for California donors, it is really important to stay in good standing. So with that little background, as I say, let's go back to our regularly scheduled program and dive into Colorado. What's the formation process for a Colorado nonprofit corporation?
Okay, so the Secretary of State governs Colorado entity formation. For a domestic nonprofit, they have a form Articles of Incorporation. This is an online form only. There isn't even a blank PDF you can print out and review and or file by mail. They do offer a PDF of instructions, and links to both the instructions and the online form will be obviously in our show notes today. As with most of these, it asks for our basics, your name, your principal address, your mailing address, your registered agent. But as always, it has some state-specific quirks. As I discovered in early August while I was working with one of our LLCs in Colorado, the principal address needs to be a street address, but it does not need to be a Colorado address. That's kind of unusual. Usually they ask for a street address in the state. The only street address in Colorado would then be a registered agent here for Colorado. Working through the rest of the instructions in order after those items, we see that at least one incorporator needs to be named with their mailing address, and you need to indicate whether there will be voting members or not. The instructions then note, quote, you must explain how the nonprofit's assets will be distributed if dissolved, unquote. It's a little fill-in box, and this is where our 501c3 dissolution language would be added. They also note that any additional information can be added as well. They've got a couple of little fill-in boxes that look like they were robust enough to cover that type of text. It looked like they were about 1,000 to 1,500 characters when I started to do a draft one, which usually covers enough for that 501c3 dissolution language. It's not complex enough to where you need several paragraphs. So that's good. Also, up to 5 documents can be attached. So they have a PDF extender in there that you can drop them in. And it specifically notes that bylaws should not be filed here. Which makes sense. Those are internal private documents that don't necessarily need to be with the Secretary of State. And then at least one person is then named as causing the document to be filed, and their address is noted as well on there. But again, it's not tied to any Colorado offices or Colorado addresses unless it's specifically your registered agent.
Great. So that's some interesting little quirks. So what about the foreign entity that needs to get a good standing certificate in Colorado? What do we file for our non-Colorado organization that wants to be operating in Colorado?
As we've seen in a few other states, Colorado has a statement of foreign entity authority. And this is generic. It covers all forms of entities, LLCs, LPs, and both profit and non-profit corporations. This, too, can only be filed online. They do have a PDF sample of the form online for review for this, though, along with a web-based instructions manual. It's very straightforward. It asks for your basics of all foreign registrations, name, where formed, address, your Colorado registered agent. It does ask for the form of the entity as it is generic, so there's a spot for you to mark nonprofit, and it allows for an additional information page to attach. And as we were just discussing, though, Colorado actually is a state which does not require a good standing from the home state. That's part of the quick there. It's literally just a one-page form. You drop it, and you are registered as long as, again, something I guess we haven't talked about in a while. I always confirm you may have to have a different name in a state you're registering in there. Just because you formed in Delaware or you formed in California, that name may not be available in other states. If you, for instance, I have one that's got a generic name. If you go to the IRS, it's something Lodge. And if you look, there are 4 different foundations with that name in 4 different states. So be careful if your name is kind of generic. Just because you've got it in your home state, you may not be able to use that when you register in other states.
Right. And there are workarounds for that, which is probably a good topic for another episode. Once we get through all the states, we can talk about naming issues. What's the cost and the turnaround time for filing the Articles of Incorporation or the Statement of Foreign Authority in Colorado?
For the domestic articles, it's $50, and for the foreign statement of authority, it's $100. For the Colorado Secretary of State filing fact, all online filings are filed, quote, real time, which means that the document is immediately processed after you receive your payment confirmation. And that's a direct quote from their website. In the past year, I've only filed the periodic reports, which is their term for annual reports in the past year. And I can attest that I've had, yes, immediate return. Within 5 to 10 minutes, I've had my copies back into my email. And I guess I did a dissolution also. And the same thing, I had it back within 10 to 15 minutes. So their website does seem to be in line with what I've seen real time.
Wow, that is astonishing. In some states, it can take weeks unless you expedite. So I guess we don't need to talk about expedite fees here.
No, we don't.
All right. But you did mention the annual filings. When are the annual filings due and what are their costs?
Colorado has what they call, again, periodic reports, and they're due annually, starting the first day of the month an entity was formed and then going on for 2 months thereafter. So as we are here recording August 13th, if I formed or registered an entity today, my report would be due annually between August 1st and October 31st. And as of July 1st, again, since we talk about checking your fees, the annual fee went up from $10 to $25 for all periodic reports. And again, these obviously are filed online as well. So,
okay, well, that all seems very straightforward. So talk a little bit about the transparency in Colorado at the Secretary of State's level. What kinds of private information are going to be made available?
Colorado is close to Delaware, we've seen, for secured information. Neither the formations nor any of the periodic reports ask for any officer or director information for the nonprofits. And as we discussed, you don't even have to have a Colorado address. You do have to have a street address listed, but it could be, any address you desire. So it's very, very tightly controlled there, what's available to the public.
So that's also super in the sense that in some states, if you change your officers, you need to update your statement of information. So Colorado seems very business friendly in these respects.
Yes, for sure. It's not California in that sense, no.
So what other state agencies does our nonprofit that has the minimum contacts in Colorado, what other agencies does the nonprofit need to register with in Colorado?
In Colorado, again, if you're organized there or you're a foreign nonprofit that solicits, holds assets, or does business in Colorado, you'll be required to file an additional registration still with the Secretary of State, but then they have a charities and fundraisers division specifically. So you're still going through the same top-level agency. It's just another paperwork there. And then if you're looking for state tax exemptions in Colorado, you need to apply with the Colorado Department of Revenue. Links can be found in the show notes to all of these Colorado agencies and, again, to a lot of the specific forms we've mentioned.
Terrific. Okay, so Colorado sounds pretty friendly. How about Wyoming? Let's go north a little bit and talk about what Wyoming looks for in formation and for Wyoming entities and foreign nonprofits that want to operate there.
In Wyoming, too, it's their Secretary of State that governs all these formations. For domestic, they have a 3-page Articles of Incorporation form. Same, it's the name, the address, your registered agent components that we've seen. Quick notes on their difference. Section 2 is a checkbox as to whether the corporation will be religious, public benefit, or mutual benefit. Again, sometimes we here in California, we sort of just write that out in the actual article. So here you've just got a checkbox to drop that out. Section 4 is for the incorporator, which can be one, but it allows for more than one incorporator to be noted. And as we get to the bottom, all of them will need to sign it. Section 6 is a checkbox for members, yes or no. Section 7 is a fill-in box for provisions regarding the distribution of assets upon dissolution. Again, this is where our 501c3 dissolution language would be added. And again, it seemed to be a rather robust form with enough room for that. Section 8 is a fill-in box for the, quote, business, unquote, of the nonprofit. This would be your purpose clause. Again, we haven't talked about that in a while, but that's very good to have your purpose clause as well in terms of what the IRS is looking for. Section 9 asks for the names and addresses of all the incorporators. Section 10 is an interesting checkbox noting consent for electronic service under certain circumstances, and that falls under the Wyoming statute 17-28-104E. This is a carve out for, I went back to check out what the statute said. It's, quote, the business entity shall execute a consent to service by electronic means for use in the limited circumstances where the business entity has no registered agent or where the agent cannot with reasonable diligence be served, unquote. So, a lot of states we've seen that if it falls off, if you don't have a registered agent, you could get in trouble with your actual filing, and that could put you out of good standing as well. Here, they've got a specific system in place to continue to get a hold of you so to make sure that you know that you no longer have a registered agent. Again, like we use a lot of the bigger services. We talked about them like CSC, like Rossi, like CT Corporation, where this isn't an issue. But a lot of times we will use, smaller local state ones that aren't necessarily as robust that will stay in business. So this is something good to think about in the background with registered agents that we don't talk about a lot.
Right. And if you're using as a registered agent someone in your nonprofit, you'll want to be sure that someone monitors that email box, because if you're not going to get it by paper mail if you fall out of compliance. So anyway, just a word to the wise. So how about the foreign nonprofit that wants to do business in Wyoming? What do they file?
So the foreign nonprofit, they have a foreign nonprofit corporation application for certificate of authority. So here we do have one that's specific to the nonprofits, unlike what we just looked at in Colorado. This is also a 3-page form with the same basics of name, address, registered agent, home state. Section 8 here does ask for the name and address of all the directors and officers. Section 9 asks if there are members. Section 10 is that same checkbox, whether it's religious, public benefit, or mutual benefit. Section 11 is an attest that, quote, the corporation accepts the Constitution of the state of Wyoming in compliance with the requirement of this Article 10, Section 5 of the Wyoming Constitution. Again, this is a reminder to check all your local state rules to make sure you are indeed in compliance with that. So maybe, again, a good idea to, if you're looking at this, to think about having maybe local Wyoming council bless you. As we've seen, you've got both these forms have had specific Wyoming statutes noted into, unlike a lot of what we see is just more generic fill in the blank and you're registered. So then Section 12 is for your signature. It needs to be an officer of the corporation. And after the signature is the notice that a good standing form from the home state must be attached. So we're back talking about that. The last page here is a registered agent consent. So your initial agent needs to sign off. Both the domestic and foreign can be filed online or via mail or in person. And then links to these forms and the online filing portal will be down below.
So that's all very interesting. And I do note that where they ask for the foreign statement, if the corporation is religious, public benefit, or mutual benefit, not all states actually have that distinction. So if you're organized in a state where you don't have those 3 options, you may have to check with local council to figure out which one you actually are, whether you're essentially categorized as religious or not. So anyway, moving on, talk a little bit about the timing for filing. How quick is Wyoming in processing these forms?
Per the Wyoming forms themselves, they have it on there that if the document is mail or paper filed, it can take up to 15 business days, and they do not allow for an expedite. However, later down on that, it says if you do it online, the process should be same day. You should have it back within 24 hours. Did a little bit of research online, and that seemed to jibe with what you would see with other people's experiences with them. I'll be honest, I haven't filed in Wyoming probably in 5-6 years at least. So I don't have any real world experience on my own, but the research seems to indicate that's true. It's about 2 to 3 weeks for paper filings, and within 24 to 48 hours for an online filing.
Yeah. So for this fast track world, there's a high preference for doing it online, and they're discouraging the paper filing. What does the cost look like in Wyoming?
For both the domestic and the foreign, this is a $50 fee, so not very much at all.
And the annual filings, what does that look like?
Both the domestic and the foreign annual reports are due every year on the first day of the anniversary month of formation. So if we register today, August 13th, our first reports will be due August 1st, 2025, and every year thereafter. For the nonprofits, the annual fee for that is $25. It's irrespective of whether it's domestic or foreign. These actually can be filed by mail, which is unusual for statements of information, annual reports lately. And if you file online, there's a convenience fee assessed by the payment processor. At current, that's an additional $2.25. That brings you up to $27.25 for your annual filing fee, which again is, well, we just talked about Colorado just went up to 25. Here in California, it's 25. So it's within what we would consider sort of that normal range across the country of an annual report.
So the transparency in Wyoming, it sounded like we do give more information than Colorado in terms of officers and directors.
As a foreign entity, when you file your initial authority document, you do have to name the officers and directors. And then once you get to your annual reports, both the domestic and foreign will need to be identified and updated in the annual reports of all your officers and directors.
So what about the other state agencies? Where else do we file when we...
As a plot twist, Wyoming does not have a charitable solicitation requirement at current. They take it at face value that you're a nonprofit. Then to obtain corporate and sales tax exemptions, the corporation will need to apply with the Wyoming Department of Revenue. And as always, there's links to all the relevant departments and documents here in the show notes.
Well, thanks so much, Joe. I really appreciate you running down some details on these 2 states and all the others, and we'll come back and do a couple more states in another month or so. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Glad to be here as always.
So that's all for this episode. Be sure to check out the show notes, like we said, for links to the resources in Colorado and Wyoming, and also links to earlier episodes on the states we've already covered. And as a reminder, if you go back to earlier episodes for states we covered in previous months, be sure to check the updated laws before looking at filing or even doing your annual report in any of those early states. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Farella, Braun & Martel has a YouTube channel, and there are several nonprofit playlists for our podcast episodes, including the playlist we're building where all the state filing episodes are in one place. So look for that link in the show notes as well. I'm Cynthia Rowland, and you've been listening to EO Radio Show, your nonprofit legal resource, brought to you by the Exempt Organizations Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. If you have suggestions for topics you would like for us to discuss, please email us at eoradioshow@fbm.com. That's eoradioshow@fbm.com. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, make a difference.